Hi, my name is Phil, or Thete in gaming terms. I've mained a Retribution Paladin in high-end raiding for many years and will be playing a Havoc Demon Hunter as my main alt for Legion. As such, I'll be unleashing onto my channel my own particular brand of detailed guides for this spec. Please note that I focus essentially on PvE content. The first item to point out is this is a long video and you may not wish to watch it in one sitting. This is fine, and I've placed timestamps for each section in the description below. Simply click show more to see them. At the point I'm releasing this video, Demon Hunters have only just been released into the game and Legion has not yet launched. As a result, a number of abilities may well be rebalanced between now and even the first weeks of Legion. In fact, Blizzard have been very clear that they have several abilities in their sights to adjust. For any class this can be an issue, but for a brand new class there might easily be major changes during the expansion itself. This means that some of the content of this video may become a little out of date at some point. In order to future-proof my guides, I'll be doing a couple of things. First of all, I don't tell you what to do in my guides ever, I hope. I explain the conditions under which certain things work well and show you examples of what is considered best practice. This means that there'll be relatively little that should go out of date very quickly, hopefully. The second thing is that as soon as enough significant changes are made, I will produce an addendum video in order to correct those things. This video will not be as long as this and will be kept in the same playlist, which you should always check for the most up-to-date content. This playlist will never feature out-of-date videos. They are always removed as soon as they're no longer needed. So with all that out of the way, let's get onto the guide itself. The Havoc Demon Hunter resource is called Fury. A small number of our abilities may generate Fury and some others consume Fury. There are also some damage dealing abilities which neither generate nor consume Fury. Our abilities generally cause one of two types of damage, physical and chaos, although there are a couple of exceptions. Physical damage is reduced by armour, so what you see on the tooltip is probably not what the ability will do in practice. Chaos damage dealing abilities are spell damage and so are not reduced by armour. In addition, our mastery buffs the chaos damage of our abilities. Given that mobility is a bit of a feature of the Demon Hunter, our mastery also provides us with a passive speed boost. All DPS specs have at least one baseline offensive cooldown ability. Ours is Metamorphosis, and this turns us into a demon form and significantly increases the damage dealt by two of our Fury spenders, whilst also increasing our haste by 25%. In addition, rather than just firing it off as most specs do, we place it within range and will leap to that point, stunning enemies nearby who can be stunned, and dealing AoE damage. It has a fairly hefty 5-minute cooldown, but there are traits on our artifact, the Twinblades of the Deceiver, that reduce it significantly, and we'll be getting those quite early. However, it's still one that we can only reasonably expect to use twice on a standard length boss fight. Demon's Bite is our most basic ability. This deals physical damage and has only the global cooldown holding its use up. It generates between 20 and 30 Fury. This makes it difficult to get a handle on how much Fury you're generating and getting into a nice rhythm in my view, but there it is. Now most specs get an extra ability when they wield their artifact. In our case this is the Fury of the Illidari, a powerful attack in both single target and especially AoE situations. It even gets buffed into being even more awesome through one of our major traits. It has no resource cost and so could and indeed should be used whenever it's available. I-Beam is one of our iconic spells, inspired from the Illidan encounter in the Burning Crusade to the Black Temple. It deals a large amount of chaos damage to all enemies in front of you. This ability always crits, but the damage is channeled over 2 seconds, during which you can pivot on the spot but not move. In AoE situations, you should choose your position carefully to hit as many mobs as possible and hope the tank isn't in the habit of moving too much. One of our major traits makes this ability much more useful, especially in AoE. Chaos Strike is our most commonly used Fury spender. Unlike I-Beam, which gets no benefit from crit at all, this ability gets extra benefit from crit, beyond the simple double damage. The ability costs 40 Fury, but half of that will be refunded if you crit. It deals chaos damage to a single target and has no cooldown, so you're limited in its use really only by your supply of Fury. This is the third baseline ability to get a major boost from one of our major traits, this time making it extremely useful in AoE, although on an unreliable basis. Blade Dance is another Fury spender and is more of an AoE ability. It has a moderate cooldown which is reduced by haste. During the 1 second we spend dancing around like an idiot with this ability, we gain 100% dodge. So this can be used to avoid a big melee hit coming in theory, if you're good at timing things. But in the main, we're treating this as an AoE ability, which becomes very powerful with one of the traits we get on our Twinblades pretty early on. Fell Rush is an ability with 2 charges, which moves us quickly forward. As such, it may be used as a useful mobility option when we need to move to mobs or away from fire very quickly. However, it also deals chaos damage and has no resource cost. This makes it useful in certain situations for damage dealing. It has particular synergy with one of our later talents. Now, charging off into the distance is not an ideal way to deal damage for a melee DPS, and this is certainly true. At the point this guide is being prepared, get it? We have a bit of a fiddle to deal with this. By macroing Fell Rush with Glide, an ability we'll come to later, it's possible to use Fell Rush and not really move more than a couple of steps. This will keep us comfortably in melee without missing a beat. Given that the ability deals damage to everything we pass through, it's well worth bearing in mind as something other than just a mobility option. Now, Blizzard are not very happy about the Glide Fiddle, and it's possible that they will come up with a solution to make it impossible. Indeed, they've already been making it a little trickier. In this situation, it may still be a good option on a boss with a large hitbox. We simply need to position ourselves at maximum melee range, which is often a good policy anyway, and to one side of the boss. We should then simply rush to the other and still be in melee range. Of course, the size of hitboxes does vary, so we'll have to take this one as it comes. I'm going to go into more detail on this one in the momentum build section. Ventral Retreat is another mobility option with some crowd control thrown in. It causes us to leap backwards, causing physical damage to all enemies that were in our melee range and reducing their movement speed by 70% for 3 seconds. As such, it can be used to make a quick getaway when you've bitten off more than you can chew in solo play, or when you've done something a little silly in group PvE potentially. As with Fell Rush, it might also feature in our DPS rotation via one of our talents. Be mindful of your surroundings. If there is a solid wall or similar object in melee range of your target, jamming yourself against it means that you can use Fell Rush and Ventral Retreat without any problems of disappearing into the sunset. Throw Glaive is a ranged ability with a 10-second cooldown that deals physical damage. It is generally not useful in single target, except through one of our talents, but does cleave onto an additional 2 targets, giving it more damage in 3 target fights. It's also useful when moving between targets, as it can be fired instantly with a nice 30-yard range. Chaos Nova is an AoE stun that also deals chaos damage to all enemies hit. The amount of damage is very low, however, so it should be treated as essentially crowd control. Its baseline form has a 1-minute cooldown and costs 30 fury. All melee DPS have an interrupt ability, as this is essential in a significant number of raid encounters each expansion, as well as having obvious use against those sneaky gnomes, casters, in PvP. Our interrupt, however, is better than most in that we can use it successfully. It rewards us with a whopping 50 fury. This means that we should ensure we have room for this fury boon when we interrupt, and we'll be wanting to be the first in any interrupt rotation in raids. Use it as often as you can. In solo play, it's also worth using even on casts you don't care about just because of this DPS benefit. In addition, it can be used at ranged, which makes it extra useful. Imprison is a crowd control which will stun a demon mob for 1 minute, as long as you don't deal damage to it. It has a 10-second cooldown, so can be reapplied if anyone gets a bit naughty with AoE. It only has a 20-yard range, however, which is not much further than body pull range and, of course, won't affect bosses. It doesn't have a resource cost or cast time, which potentially makes up for the short range. Probably of more use annoying gnomes, warlocks, than in PvE, but there's always the possibility it could be useful in some dungeon in Advanced Mythic Plus. Blur is our main defensive ability. Its baseline form reduces damage taken by 35% for 10 seconds with a 1-minute cooldown. It also increases our dodge by 50%, but this is of niche use only in group PvE, especially without a taunt ability. We have an entire talent row which can alter blur in some way. Darkness is another defensive ability, but it's most useful in raids. It affects everyone in an 8-yard radius around you for 8 seconds. Everyone affected has a chance to avoid all the damage from any given attack during this time. As you can see, with enough people in it and everyone taking damage, some people are bound to benefit, but you can hardly rely on it doing anything with just 1 or 2 people in it. Spectral Sight reduces your movement speed but allows you to see hidden players, even when invisible, stealthed or hiding behind walls. At first glance this is just a PvP ability, and maybe some creative developer will think of a cunning way to make it useful in a raid sometime. But I use it a lot when leveling. It also allows you to see treasures. So every time you've finished in a small area, just use Spectral Sight to check you haven't missed any of those valuable treasure chests. Shattered Souls is a passive ability that becomes important on trash fights, especially solo play. It's also useful on boss fights with adds maybe. If we kill an enemy that yields experience or honour, we spawn a soul fragment, and that heals us for 25% of our maximum health. Additionally, if it was a demon we killed, we get a 20% damage boost for 15 seconds. Do note that for group work, we tend to need the killing blow to get the fragment spawning, so we won't get as many as you might think in group PvE, even with lots of adds. Whilst falling, we can double tap the jump key to glide. This works exactly like a goblin glider and is useful for avoiding going the long way around when on top of something high. When demon hunters jump, we can jump again at the apex to get even higher. This allows us to get into sneaky places and over obstacles that others cannot. With some specs, talents work independently of one another mostly. Not so with the Havoc Demon Hunter, where several talents actually support each other pretty well. This synergy gives rise to a few builds, one important of which I will be discussing in more detail at the end of this section. Fell Mastery is the pick of the talents in many situations from this row. It increases the damage of Fell Rush by 50% and also provides you with a 25 Fury boost if you do some damage with it. Chaos Cleave causes Chaos Strike to deal 50% extra damage to an additional target. It's an option for 2-target cleave where you don't fancy the momentum build, but even then it's not a clear winner using Sims. I'm not at all sure it's a talent that's likely to be a standout choice in any other situation, and as I say, does not even become the obvious choice on a 2-target cleave fight if you are comfortable using Fell Rush. Blind Fury increases the duration and therefore damage of I-Beam. This isn't really regarded as a talent that would be useful in general, with its only chance being in heavy AoE where you don't fancy making much use out of Fell Rush. It can potentially increase the power of the Anguish major trait on our artifact, which I'll talk more about later. Prepared reduces the cooldown of Vengeful Retreat and also causes it to generate Fury if you deal damage with it. The fact that the Fury is dealt over time is nice because it means you can use the ability when quite high already on Fury without wasting it on overcapping. It's the obvious accompaniment to the Momentum talent in a later tier. But for the next choice. Demon Blades removes Demon's Bite and causes your auto attacks to generate Fury instead, as well as dealing out shadow damage most of the time. In my view, the damage being shadow as opposed to chaos is probably to prevent mastery values messing about with the tuning of abilities such as this. In theory, the main purpose of this talent is to remove the need for spamming a Fury builder when there are so many abilities available to Demon Hunters. However, in practice, this talent is currently the clear DPS winner in this row in all situations. However, I will just caution that Blizzard have made a point of saying they do not want it to be the choice for best DPS, but seemingly a pure quality of life talent choice. I can only say that at the time of producing this guide, it is the choice to take. If things change, you will find the update in the addendum video in the Havoc Demon Hunter playlist given in the description below. Demonic Appetite gives your Chaos Strike a random chance to spawn a lesser soul fragment. This not only gives you a bit of a heal, but also a very welcome 30 Fury. With Demon Hunters having no dedicated self-heal, especially while leveling, this is a great talent for solo play. It really comes in useful when tackling elite mobs. The fragments do not spawn reliably, of course, but if you keep a careful eye on when and where they spawn, and you don't move near them too early, they can be stored up and come in very handy. Fellblade works like a short duration charge which also deals fire damage to the target. It's likely the damage is fire rather than chaos to prevent mastery values messing about with the tuning of the ability. It also generates 30 Fury, so should not ideally be used if this would cause overcap. The range is too short to be very effective as a tool for entering combat and has always struck me as being a good way of getting back into melee range when using Vengeful Retreat with the Prepared talent. As such, it's the sort of thing that may be useful in solo play, but on boss fights where you may not need to leave melee range to use Vengeful Retreat, I don't see too many competitive applications. Certainly Sims show it to be some distance behind in terms of damage increase. As a gap closer, Fell Rush is usually as effective, and when the Fell Mastery talent is taken, does more damage. First Blood causes your Blade Dance to cost less Fury, which is nice, and you deal much more damage against the primary target. This sounds like it could be a useful talent on a boss, surrounded by ads. You're able to AoE without sacrificing damage on the boss in this way. However, when you look at Sims, it doesn't actually seem to be a particularly good talent to take in any situation, but of course tuning could change anything. Bloodlet causes your throw glaive to deal another 200% damage in the form of a dot over 10 seconds. This means that throw glaive becomes a high damage ability even on single target, and especially so with 3-target cleave. However, to be effective, the dot has to be able to run its course, so not ideal on mobs that die within a second or two. Against a number of mobs, Bloodlet will win out over First Blood. However, if you're thinking of in terms of leveling, the chances of ads living long enough for the dot to do enough damage can often be remote. In this case, First Blood might be a better option, especially if you plan on regularly taking on groups of mobs. The same possibly could be true of Dungeon Trash. However, not all Dungeon Trash dies very, very quickly, and on balance, Bloodlet may end up being the most common choice for many group PvE talent builds. There's something to be said for Fellblade while leveling or in solo content in general, but other than that, only for niche encounters, I would say, for group PvE. Netherwalk replaces Blur with an immunity defensive which lasts for a reduced 5 seconds, but with a greater cooldown of 1.5 minutes. It gives you a 100% speed boost, making it useful for extracting yourself from an ill-advised pull in solo play. Note that you can't attack while immune, so it's very much an ability for emergencies or potentially niche situations in group PvE. Desperate Instincts replaces Blur as well, but with a version that automatically procs when you drop below 35%. The payoff for this lack of control is that it can proc twice as often as Blur can be activated. There are very few situations where this may be useful. You might consider it when soloing a tough elite mob. Soul Rending is a talent that provides us with 100% leech while Metamorphosis is active. I did take issue during Alpha with the idea that our main DPS cooldown also becomes our best defensive, but it does have good synergy with the level 110 talent Demonic. Also in solo play, and especially while leveling, it's useful against elite mobs as we can maintain 100% health whilst in our most damaging portion of the fight without reducing our DPS. This is my preferred choice even without Demonic, simply because I think Blur is a pretty good defensive in itself, and I wouldn't want to be changing it except in potentially niche situations where the other two talents might be useful. Momentum, this is the big one. This is a DPS boost talent which has split opinion rather. It is currently the best talent to take in this row from a DPS point of view. However, there are certain situations under which it might not be the best, and I discuss these in detail in the section on the Momentum build after this. Momentum increases your DPS by 20% for 4 seconds whenever you use Fell Rush or Vengeful Retreat. It supports a playstyle of building up Fury and then spending it quickly in a short window. In between this, there is the dancing around in order to trigger Momentum in the first place. It supports the fantasy of a class that is constantly on the move, but some find it fiddly. Fell Eruption deals a large amount of chaos damage and stuns the target for 2 seconds. If the target is permanently immune to stuns, so this will include most bosses, then it does double damage. This is what makes it potentially quite powerful. This would amount to our largest single target damaging ability, which on a 35-second cooldown and cost 20 Fury. Nemesis is applied to a target and you will deal an extra 20% damage against it for the next minute. It has a 2-minute cooldown. If the Nemesis target dies, then you can do 20% extra damage to any other mobs of the same creature type for the remaining duration. This is likely to be good on single target boss fights, as well as trash in dungeon where the mobs are almost exclusively of the same type. This restriction on creature type, however, does give you pause for thought when using it. So, which is best? On a single target fight, all of these options are strong, though Sims has Momentum a little ahead of Fell Eruption by about 3%, and Nemesis by, well, less than 1%. However, Momentum is not for everyone, as I said, and I'll be going over this in greater detail in the next section. If you don't wish to use Momentum, then both Nemesis and Fell Eruption are reasonable choices. Nemesis would be the best choice on single target boss because you get full benefit of the uptime. However, if your target dies and other mobs are not all of the same creature, then you have a problem with Nemesis. Fell Eruption gets its main benefit on bosses. Remember, it only does this powerful double damage if the mob can't be stunned. In AoE, of course, Nemesis and Fell Eruption will lose ground because they are entirely single target focused, but Momentum is universal. But see the Momentum build discussion before making up your mind. Master of the Glaive is generally the go-to talent in this row. It gives your throw glaive 2 charges and so is particularly strong with the Bloodlet talent. It also causes throw glaive to snare enemies hit by 50% for 6 seconds and so is useful if you get into trouble in solo play, as well as having some good crowd control utility in group PvE. Unleashed power means that Chaos Nova, our AoE stun, no longer has a resource cost and also has a much reduced cooldown. On a fight where we're expected to use our AoE stun to help deal with mechanics, this talent is likely to be a no-brainer. When you need split-second timing on stunning adds, you don't want to risk not having enough fury or holding on to more than you needed to and reducing your damage. Demon Reborn resets the cooldowns of I-Beam, Chaos Nova and Blur when we activate Metamorphosis. The most obvious application as I see for this talent is when soloing a very tough elite. You could potentially use all of these abilities on the opener and then use Metamorphosis, providing you with the damage reduction and stun to be used much earlier than would normally be the case. I do not really see other uses for the talent in group PvE, however. Chaos Blades is a standard DPS cooldown which increases all of your damage by a flat amount, based on your mastery for 12 seconds. Auto attacks deal triple damage and also cause chaos damage, which is also increased by our mastery. Guess what? This ability gets better the more mastery we have. Now, because of this greater than usual reliance on a particular secondary stat, it's always a little tricky to judge, but Chaos Blades is generally the talent of choice here for single target or 2 target cleave fights. Fell Barrage is a channeled ability with up to 5 charges that deals chaos damage to your target and any other enemies next to the target. It also has a nice range of 30 yards. Damage and attacks have a chance to generate a charge, so it does not take as long as you might otherwise think to build back up to the 4 or 5 stacks where it would be useful to use again. As you can probably guess, this ability becomes especially useful in AoE. Demonic means that upon finishing your I-Beam channel, you gain Metamorphosis for 5 seconds. This is particularly useful with soul rending while soloing content as the leech within those 5 seconds, especially if you have the fury to bang out a couple of annihilations, is enough to heal you for a lot. It's pretty good on tough elite mobs for this purpose. However, it's the third choice DPS talent for group PvE, as in pure damage terms it loses out to both of the other two in all situations. Okay, so Demon Hunters have some really nice combinations of talents which I've already alluded to in the previous section. However, there are some things worth talking about in a bit more detail, and top of that list is the momentum build. So as a reminder, for momentum to work you need to be making regular use of Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat. For this reason you'd think Prepared would be the best for reducing the cooldown on Vengeful Retreat, however because Demon Blades is so strong we don't. Still, if Blizzard do manage to nerf Demon Blades out of the picture, as seems to be their intent, then you will be prepared. So momentum lasts 4 seconds. This clearly supports a playstyle of build up your fury, trigger momentum, spend like crazy, rinse and repeat. The thing is that both of the abilities that trigger momentum send you off into the sunset. Simply running back to melee is wasting most of that time, making the talent all but useless and certainly not the talent to choose. However, there are a couple of workarounds. The first is based on nullifying the Fell Rush movement. Using this macro it's possible to jump and as you're about to land, use this to trigger Fell Rush but arrest the forward movement almost immediately. This prevents you ever leaving melee range. It seems ideal but there are a few flies in the ointment. First of all, Blizzard are taking active steps to prevent it, and no matter what I say now, this technique may be impossible by the time we get to select momentum. Another issue is that timing is important and will take practice. If you do it at close to the apex of our jump, we'll actually charge off into the distance, and a further distance than if we just did it along the ground, as I'll show you in a moment. If we do it too late, then when we've landed, we're still charging off even if not as far. This might not just send us out of melee range, it could potentially send us off the edge of a cliff, in front of a cleaving boss, or into a bomb type effect, making us very unpopular with our group. Also, with our cameras zoomed out, as well as the annoying spell effects and pets, it's hard to visually identify the best time to use the macro. It does become a matter of timing, and latency can affect this. So, just to show what we mean about this, so what we'd ideally do is, just at the point at which you come down, use it just before you land on the ground. But what happens if you use it at the incorrect time? So let's say we do it actually as we're jumping in the air. Well, that wasn't so bad actually. Don't usually do that. I think the latency I have on these American servers might be affecting it. Let's try that again. Right, that's much more likely what's going to happen. Now, just to highlight that, let's say we jumped in the air and we've come back down, so we've done it a little bit too late. You don't actually go as far, so it's actually
better to do it along the ground than it is at the top of your jump. So jumping can sometimes make it a little bit worse. Now the difficulty you can see there, I've actually tried to do that properly. The difficulty is especially when you zoom in all the way out, and you might have spell effects in the area and various things like that, and pets and other melee classes around you. Quite difficult to see when you're just about to land on the ground. Now, if we take something like this, it doesn't have a large hitbox. I can't move out very far. I'm out of melee range there. I mean, I'm even missing a little bit there. I need to be in there. That's it. There's not much there. And sometimes this is the case in raids as well. Now, if I just do a normal shoot, I'm miles away. I've got to run back. So, same if I do something like that. I'm running back before I can use it. So, I could just throw glaive, of course, on the run back. It is a tricky one. It's going to be, of course, fairly straightforward on any boss that's not moving around a lot, or even is moving around a lot, but has a large hitbox. As I've shown you in the other video. But in a situation like this, small hitbox, where you really do want to try and get the benefit of this macro. I mean, first of all, the macro may not even work. But that's what you really want to be doing, ideally. That is what you want to do. Of course, there's nothing you can do about that. That is sending you back. But you can take Fellblade and Fellblade back in, but you're not going to do that on the raid boss.
So what are some other options? Well, one obvious one is to make use of the environment if you can. If the boss or trash pack is near a solid object, such as a wall, aim yourself at that so it will halt your fell rush or ventral retreat before you get anywhere. On bosses, and raid bosses in particular, the hitbox is often large enough that you don't even need tricks. Just be at max melee range and to one side. You can then either fell rush or ventral retreat across to the other side of the boss's hitbox, just don't go through the front of the boss. Obviously remember that fell rush sends you forward and ventral retreat sends you back, so point yourself the right way. But do you even need to take momentum? If you look at the various Havoc community forums, you see an awful lot of nonsense talked about momentum being the strongest DPS choice, and so you're gimping yourself if you don't take it. All of these people, as far as I can tell, haven't spent any time playing the Havoc Demon Hunter, and certainly not testing other things out for themselves, and certainly not done any theory crafting on it. Using Simcraft, we can easily investigate a little further. Now, just a disclaimer here regarding Simcraft. Remember that at the time of producing this guide, we are using a set profile for Sims. Yes, we can fiddle about with it, but we can't import anyone's actual Demon Hunter because they only exist on the beta. That being said, the profile is a suitable one for comparison, which is not the case for all specs. For a simple single target fight and with an artifact of 20 trait points, something that should be possible before raids open up, we can see the following results for each talent in this row. Other talents have been chosen in line with what's best for single target. So you can see that Momentum and Nemesis are a few % ahead of Fell Eruption, but Momentum and Nemesis are within less than 1% of each other. But Momentum is still ahead, so I should use that, right? Sure, it's ahead on a sim. But digging into that sim, we see that the uptime Momentum is a little under 57%. Looking at the logs from raid testing of the most effective Havoc Demon Hunters, it's common to see uptimes around 53 to 54% mark. At this point, you've wiped out the advantage momentum. Putting it in even starker contrast, if you cock up a single fell rush because either you do shoot yourself off into the distance, or you delay it because you're distracted by something else, or you just fancied scratching your ass for a bit, just one missed chance from momentum in a spend cycle completely wipes out the advantage of momentum. So is momentum the best DPS talent here for single target? In most cases, for most people I mean, no it's not. Blizzard actually promoted this idea quite strongly last year that often people see a talent being taken by the best passing player, or the one that a sim shows to be strongest, and never actually look at the conditions under which they are the best. If those conditions don't actually exist with your play or in your raid, then the basis of that decision is simply wrong. When AoE matters, however, momentum does stand out more. Remember that Nemesis only buffs our damage on the target of this effect, and if placed on the boss, we're not going to get any benefit on adds. If we look at a Beast Lord type of simulation, where it's mostly single target, but there are adds now and then with some movement thrown in, then we get the following situation. So momentum opens out a bigger lead, which would only get larger the more AoE damage was needed on an encounter. So it is still a useful technique to develop, and it's well worth practicing using momentum. In this section, I'm going to take a look at the damage breakdown of all abilities. Now, I was in two minds as to whether to take crit into account and use the crit value from the Simcraft profile for comparison's sake. The reason for this is I-beam always crits, so it's actually better than it appears on a normal breakdown when you're just looking at the raw numbers. However, although I've taken this into account in my priority suggestion, I'm not going to include that below. Apart from anything else, I've taken these numbers from a relatively newly leveled Demon Hunter, and yours may be different with different gear, but the general priority should remain the same. Another point is that I have assumed that we have spent 20 points and traits on the Twinblades of the Deceiver. This seems reasonable for the start of raid progress. Finally, some of our abilities deal physical damage, which means they are reduced by armour. I have taken this into account in my calculations. Full action priority lists could get very complicated, so I've removed references to abilities or talents that I am advising against in order to simplify them. There are some talents which may not be advised technically, such as Fell Barrage for single target, but because they can be useful on a fight which is mostly single target, but with packs of ads spawning in periodically, I've still included them in case you choose that talent. It's only talents which are uncompetitive in realistic group PvE scenarios that I have left out. So for single target, we'll be going for the following talents here, I'm suggesting. Fell Mastery, Demon Blades, Bloodlet. Soul Rending is a standard thing, but you know, the level 104 stuff doesn't affect your DPS at all. Momentum, Master of the Glaive, and Chaos Blades. Now the damage breakdown looks a little like this. Fury of the Illidari should be used whenever available. Only delay if you think your mobs will be moved out of its area of effect early. Beyond that, avoid using your high damage abilities outside the momentum buff. Remember, with Fury of the Illidari, as soon as you have the Rage of the Illidari major trait, you get a massive explosion at the end. You really don't want mobs to be somewhere else when that explosion comes in. Beyond that, avoid using your high damage abilities outside the momentum buff. Using momentum, you want to get into a cycle of building Fury and then using either Fell Rush or Ventral Retreat, followed by your highest damage dealing abilities in this priority order. Chaos Strike is often moved up in the priority order over Fell Barrage at fewer than 5 stacks, as Fell Barrage is a channeled ability, and so we prefer to wait for a full stacks before using it. Chaos Strike is a nice cheap and cheerful ability that's an instant strike when you have the Fury for it, and nothing better to do. Remember that crits return half the Fury back, so it doesn't usually cost as much as it looks. I-beam is not as high priority as it might otherwise appear. Again, it's channeled, so that keeps you in place for a couple of seconds. We have a fairly fast-paced DPS rotation, so standing still and channeling for a couple of seconds is a bit annoying. Note that some abilities may move around in the priority list a little if you take very different talents, but I don't want to overcomplicate things. All I would say is if you take Nemesis or Fell Eruption rather than Momentum, then the priority remains the same. You're just obviously not having to make sure Momentum is active before using high damage abilities. Now, when it comes to 2-target cleave, the advised talent profile looks much the same as for single target. Some people may choose to take Chaos Cleave, and so I've included the damage for that in the Chaos Strike row. However, if you're taking Momentum, and this talent pulls ahead of the others the more targets you have, then you'd still want Fell Mastery in the level 15 talent row. Fell Barrage is somewhat behind Chaos Blades, even though Fell Barrage does AoE damage. However, if there is the prospect of more adds entering the fight periodically, feel free to change to that talent. In a 2-target situation, our ability damage breakdown looks much more like this. As I noted, I have assumed that we would be taking Chaos Cleave for the damage you see for Chaos Strike right there. However, if using Momentum, this would be unlikely, so Chaos Strike would realistically be relegated to a Fury spending role to avoid overcapping. In fact, even if you didn't take Momentum, Fell Mastery and Chaos Cleave do very similar damage on Sims, though not needed to use Fell Rush might make Chaos Cleave a quality of life choice in this case. Now, AoE can mean anything really. To avoid overcomplicating things, I'm going to assume 4 targets in melee range. When it comes to deciding whether or not a fight is AoE for the purpose of talent, it's worth bearing in mind how often you expect adds to be up for in the fight and how important they are. Some fights look like AoE fights, but are in fact single target fights really. Beast Lord Darmak in Blackrock Foundry and Warlords of Draenor was a classic case of this. So when it comes to talents, Fell Barrage does move ahead of Chaos Blades. You might also see First Blood as a benefit because of the reduced Fury cost. However, as Blade Dance is on a moderate cooldown, because Chaos Strike moves right down the priority list, and because the talent doesn't actually buff the damage of Blade Dance regarding adds, we are still much better off with Bloodlet. Of course, continued tuning can change all sorts of things, but currently there is little variation required in talents between pure single target and pure AoE for Havoc Demon Hunters. In fact, there's only the difference between Chaos Blades and Fell Barrage, quite frankly. As well as the usual rush to gear up our characters in time for the opening of raids and hard mode dungeons, we'll also be concerned with developing our artifact weapon. Most of the traits, in common with other specs, improve the output of certain abilities or reduce their cooldown. However, there are probably a higher than average number of more interesting traits to consider. Balanced Blades is an early trait and improves the damage of our blade dance according to the number of mobs in range, so it's not simply an AoE ability that does double damage on 2 targets and triple damage on 3. It actually increases out of proportion with that, because the more mobs there are in an area, we get an extra 10% damage from it for each one. Against large trash packs, especially in dungeons, we can end up doing ridiculous amount of damage. Demon Speed means that you generate 2 charges of Fell Rush when you use Blur. This could be extremely useful with Momentum talent on a fight where you don't feel the need to use Blur defensively. Instead, you could use it offensively, perhaps to significantly increase your uptime momentum during high damage periods, for example when Heroism or Metamorphosis are active. Do note that this doesn't give you an extra 2 charges, but simply replenishes them early if they were used and on cooldown, so choose your timing wisely. Every spec has a few traits which are not very useful in dungeons or raids, but for Havoc, we're pretty good on this. The only trait that I would say has no serious use in group PvE would be Deceiver's Fury, but this is one of the last places you're going to spend points anyway. In terms of the route to choose when developing your Twinblades, the path shown here is universally agreed as being the best. Note that the first trait we're going to be heading to once we've put points in traits around the Metamorphosis and Blade Dance is going to be the one that buffs I-Beam. Then we're going to go and buff Fury of the Illidari, and then finally going over to buff Chaos Strike. Note with the major trait for Chaos Strike that actually could affect our priority list for AoE. However, doing it in this order means that we're not going to get that major trait for months, so we'll worry about that one later. Now, as with all specs, there are 8 legendary items that we can obtain from the launch of Legion, though we can initially only equip 1 at a time. But still, if we only have 1, that's not a big choice to make, is it? With about 7 weeks development of the Order Hall, we will be able to equip 2. Now, 5 of these items directly increase our damage, though some are better than others. Which one would be favourite depends on which abilities you're going to make most use out of. Anger of the Half-Giants, a ring, means that your Demon's Bite or Demon's Blade will generate extra fury, which will be a benefit in all situations. The amount generated is even more variable than the normal abilities themselves, however. The others buff a specific ability, and so the benefit may depend on the type of fight and your progress with the Twinblades. Acor, the Eternal Hunger, a chest, is a very useful defensive item as it provides you with 50% leech when you activate Blur. This could be useful in both solo play as well as group PvE where things aren't going so well, and of course has obvious use in PvP. Prydar's Zavaric's Magnum Opus is a neck, which is a nice little defensive in that you benefit from an absorb shield which appears if you don't take damage for 5 seconds. Either of these two would be a nice consolation prize should you fail to obtain a good DPS legendary for progress. The only useless item from a PvE point of view is Cephas' Secret, another ring which seems more suited to PvP really. So one thing people always look for in a guide are the secondary stat priorities. The first thing to point out is that some stats favour different abilities more than others. This means that your stat priority changes according to your situation and choice of both talent and priority abilities. So we'll start off by simulating 3 types of fight: a pure single target fight, a single target fight with regular adds, and an all-out AoE and heavy movement fight. In each case we're using the standard Simcraft profile. Remember, stat weights will change according to your specific gear, and we're also using the talents that I've been suggesting earlier on. In addition, it also includes that 20 points spent on the artifact. Remember, this is not going to reflect your character exactly. It's not going to reflect my character. It's not reflecting any character. It's just a standard set. As you'll certainly have different gear and may well have different artifact and talent choices, your stat weights will vary a little. Also, it's easy to see a priority order as the law, but if stat weights show 2 to be fairly close, you might consider interactivity. For example, Chaos Strike crits return Fury, so crit rating is especially good for Chaos Strike. If you find yourself getting a lot of use out of that ability, crit. However, I-Beam gets no benefit at all, as it always crits, so crit not so good when I'm using a lot of I-Beam. What do I do? Mastery provides passive movement speed increase. This won't be factored in at all for DPS sims, but you might consider it to be useful in many situations. It won't turn it from a distant worst stat to best, but you may or may not decide it's worth increasing value slightly as a result of this. Note the importance of weapon DPS. This means that when selecting relics for your Twinblades, the trait attached to it is secondary to the item level. Always go for the highest item level for relics, unless it's literally a difference of like one item level perhaps, and also the difference between a strong and a worthless trait. You should also note that agility is way ahead of secondary stats in all situations, and most especially on AoE. This is an indication to strongly favour item level with all armour pieces. When it comes to secondary stats, however, they're all over the place. Haste is dead last for single target, but the best for boss fights where adds periodically spawn in. This demonstrates just how misleading having a stat priority list is. In reality, you have several for different situations. Of course, what you'll want to do is obtain as many pieces of gear and create kits for single target and AoE, as well as flexible mixes of the two. But that takes time and is not easy. So how should you proceed in the meantime? I'd suggest consider your encounters. If mythic dungeons are going to be your thing, then the mix of single target and AoE is probably the one to go for. If the more difficult raid encounters that you anticipate are like to more single target, then try and favour that. But whatever you do, if you want to be serious, and I don't think you've watched this far if you don't, then get your thinking away from the concept of a fixed stat priority. Now, when it comes to choosing what gear to use, this is what I will suggest. Yes, we could come up with a BIS list. I could produce a spreadsheet with all the pieces of gear, and I could put in stat weights and say, oh, use these pieces of gear. But as I've already said, your stat weights change according to different fights. This is not helpful. I would suggest simming yourself. I've done a video guide on how to use Simcraft. I'd also suggest getting your own stat weights for different situations. I would do this for both single target and AoE and a mixture of single target and AoE. And I would input them into an add-on called Pawn. I've also done a video on this. Using that, it might help you decide not only what is your best set of gear in terms of what you've got in your bags for single target and AoE and various types of fight, it might also help you decide what pieces of gear you want to most go for. Okay, one last little resource. In order to help support my YouTube channel, I created a website. It is purely there to support the YouTube channel. It's not there for a separate purpose. But what you can find is some of the content of this video will also be in here. So if you click at the top, there's various different sections. Havoc Demon Hunter is the one we're interested in. Whether it'll look exactly like this depends on when you're viewing the video. This is what it looks like at the time I'm uploading the video. And there's different sections you'll be able to click on. For example, if we click on this one, it'll show the playlist for the Havoc Demon Hunter on YouTube, so you can check that out. The featured article is always over the first one I would suggest looking at. So we could click on this one, for example, and it goes through the initial stuff on damage abilities, on talents, and on momentum there. I mean, at the bottom of this page, there's also links to the various other sections, or you can always click at the top, go to Havoc Demon Hunter, click on some of the other ones. One thing might be of interest, it's not mentioned in the video, but tracking abilities. People sometimes ask, oh, can I have your weak auras? I don't use weak auras, I use Tell Me When. I've got a video that shows you how to use Tell Me When. I do also have, I will have a link here at the moment. Google Docs is messing me about, but by the time most of you are watching this, I'll have a link to my current Tell Me When setup for Demon Hunters here. Just bear in mind, I don't make fully comprehensive ones. I only make them for the things that I need, and that can vary every few weeks. I might well tweak it and change it, but I'll keep remembering to try and update and put it here. I would always strongly recommend that you set your own up to suit you personally. In terms of weak auras, some people in the Havoc Demon Hunter community have very kindly put some up. There's a link for one of them there, and I'll be putting other ones up if I see any that look reasonable as well. So you'll be able to go on here, for example, if you want any stuff like that. So check that out if you think it might be useful. So as always, I hope you found that useful. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe and share. If you've got any specific questions, feel free to put them in the comments below or to email me directly. Also, bear in mind, as I've said before, things in here are going to change. That's all there is to it. They'll change for any class and spec, but a new spec, new class, especially when Blizzard says there's abilities they specifically want to change, it's absolutely going to change. Remember, when there's a significant enough
changes, I will do an addendum video. So don't forget to click on the playlist. Keep coming back. Always check that playlist. Remember, as soon as videos are out of date, they will not feature there anymore. They'll be removed and updated ones will go in that playlist. So the playlist will always have the most up-to-date videos. Keep checking it out. Okay, so until next time, I'll see you later.